Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to the first proper episode of my summer series. I did a series last year where I talked about the top 20, I believe, or top 25 progressive rock albums of all time. And I used kind of a scientific method of using prog archives and how things are ranked and trying to be as objective as possible. This summer, I'm going the complete opposite way, and I'm talking about my top 40 albums. Full stop. Just my top 40 favorites. No stipulations. No, sometimes I give myself these arbitrary rules. Only one album per artist. Only a certain number of albums from certain genres or certain decades or something like that. No, this is my top 40 favorite albums with all my biases in place. There could be 20 albums from the same artist. There can be albums all from, the 70s or all from the 2000s. There's no restrictions on what I can talk about. I did a short episode, a preamble, kind of explaining my process and how I arrived at these top 40 albums. So I won't go in depth here. You can check out that episode. I also talked about some honorable mentions, many of which are behind me on the wall. I'm thinking that each subsequent episode I'll put the albums behind me that I talked about in the previous episode. So it gives you an idea of some of the albums covered. And just a snapshot of my taste, if you want to know like what kind of music I'm into. Very much into progressive rock, but skewed towards modern progressive rock from like the 90s onwards is really my favorite style of music. So you're going to see a lot of that on this list. So let's dive into it, starting with number 40. I'm just going to talk about the record. I'm going to pull it out, the physical version that I have, and give you the reasons why I love it, why it's important to me, and, some of those special memories that I have with these records. So these are all meaningful to me. Really, my criteria was just that it has to have a personal connection and it has to be a consistent album all the way through. Like, I love every track. There's no skips. It's just a pure, perfect album from my perspective. And like I said, this is very subjective. Some of these won't be your favorites. Some of you will think, oh, he should have picked this album from this artist. But this is just me and what means the most to me and what I've enjoyed throughout my life. And I'm doing this partly because I turned 40 last year. So this has been like kind of a year in the making. And so I thought 40 albums to represent 40 years of life, I thought was a cool concept. So that's kind of where this stemmed from. So let's get into it. Without further ado, I've done enough talking, right? So let's get into the records. And I'm going to move over so I can show the records off. And here we go. All right, first at number 40, we have Nickel Creek and their album Celebrants, which came out in 2023. Talked about on my channel. It ranked very high in that year. And it's one of the least prog albums, so it's funny to start out with this one. But I wanted to showcase something that showed my love for bluegrass music, and this is as close as it comes to a perfect album to me in this kind of progressive-ish bluegrass. I'm a huge fan of Chris Thile, who plays mandolin on this record. We've also got Sarah Watkins on violin and vocals, Sean Watkins on guitar and vocals. But this album feels a bit of a conceptual record, talking about life and about how sometimes the dissonance, the things that don't work out quite perfectly in life are actually kind of the things that make up a very impactful life and are important. So it's kind of a celebration of life in a lot of ways. I love these three musicians. They've done several records together. They played when they were kids together, and I love all of their work. But I feel like this is the most mature work that they've done that feels like it can dip its toes in the prog folk kind of world as well. But just beautiful playing, great vocal harmonies. Every track has something cool and interesting and different to it. And I've just fallen in love with this record. And you'll see from my list that I have kind of a recency bias, stuff that has really struck me and connected with me recently slips into my list, even though I think a lot of people kind of stick to the albums that they grew up with and that were important to them when they were teenagers and young adults. But I really love new music, and when something really strikes me, I put it high on my list. So this sneaks in at number 40, Nickel Creek Celebrants. Another newer record that slips in at number 39 is Meer and their album Wheels Within Wheels, which I crowned my favorite album in 2024. This is crossover prog from Norway. Think chamber prog. There's orchestral elements. It's a 7-piece progressive pop, chamber pop group with these sibling dual vocals that I absolutely adore. And this record just connected to me really deeply. And I know, like, not everyone felt as strongly about this record, but their previous album, I believe it's called Playing House, like, really struck me and was a new band that just really excited me. And I love that record. I even called it my favorite record of the year, even though in retrospect I would probably change that. But it just really struck me as a band that connects with me. I really love their sound and style, bringing this progressive feel, but having a poppier aesthetic and these orchestral kind of elements to their sound. You know, they have viola and, you know, violin and all of these, like, different instruments in the mix of their sound, and these beautiful dual vocalists. Unfortunately, the male vocalist, Newt, has left the group, so that's unfortunate moving forward, but I have a lot of confidence that they'll still make a lot of great music. And this album came out when I was kind of down a little bit about my YouTube channel. I just had a kind of weird experience with the channel that I won't delve into, and so I was pretty discouraged and kind of considering stopping the channel and all this kind of stuff. And I listened to this record, and it just, like, really hit me in the heart and, like, made me realize why I love music so much. And every track just really touched me deeply, and it still does. So this makes it at number 39, Meer's Wheels Within Wheels. All right, number 38, I'm picking The Tangent and the album The Music That Died Alone. This has been one of my favorite groups for a long time, and this is back when I was first discovering modern progressive rock and really excited about it back in 2003. And I love Andy Tillison, who's kind of the main mastermind behind this band and this record. But you bring in these guys from the Flower Kings. That was my entry point. I was already a big Flower Kings fan at this point, so when I heard Royna Stolt is on this record, I immediately jumped on it. It's just really fun, expressive, bombastic symphonic prog with some jazz fusion with, like, Canterbury style. There's a whole track called the Canterbury Sequence, and it's just these big epic tracks. It starts with In Darkest Dreams, which is one of my favorite Tangent tracks. That's expansive, you know, epic, divided into these different sections, and it just blasts you right away with just this power and this fun sound. And then you get the Canterbury Sequence, which brings a little bit of that jazzier, kind of more laid-back quality. Uphill From Here is kind of the shorter single track. And then The Music That Died Alone is just a beautiful serenade. I really love Andy Tillison's his lyrics and how he's really nostalgic for the classic music, and he brings that into his records. And to me, they peaked with, like, their very first record. They've had several fantastic ones after this as well, but this is the one that really brought me into the band, that brought this super excitement when I first heard it. This, you know, there's nothing more exciting than when you hear a record realizing, okay, this is going to be one of my new favorite bands, because I immediately connect with this and love it. So this really kind of harkens back to that period when I was getting really excited about modern progressive rock, which I'll talk about throughout this whole series, about how I kind of formed a bedrock of classic progressive rock from my dad's influence, and then explored newer progressive rock and got a little bit obsessed, and this was one of the stepping stones to that process, and I still love it to this day. All right, this is kind of a last-minute switch. I had a different record at this position, so I talked about this already in my honorable mentions. I briefly talked about it, but I decided it has to be on this list because it's just one of my favorite records of all time. So it's Spock's Beard and their album 5. I actually had Kindness of Strangers in this spot, but decided to swap it. I think I like 5 just a slight bit more. To me, this is kind of one of the peaks of the Spock's Beard catalog. I won't say this is the only Spock's Beard thing you'll see on this list, but it really lives and dies by the beginning and ending, the first and closing track. You know, At the End of the Day is maybe my favorite Spock's Beard track, one of my top 10 favorite tracks of all time. I just think it's perfect. And The Great Nothing that closes the record is also fantastic. So the reason why I didn't quite get it into the top 40 initially was because I thought the middle tracks were weaker and made it a little bit imbalanced in comparison, but re-listening to this record recently, I love the middle tracks too. I love Revelation. It's kind of a different track for Spock's Beard. It's darker and moodier and almost brings this kind of grungy kind of aspect. Thoughts Part 2 I've always loved. I just love anything that's Gentle Giant related and has those vocal rounds and quirkiness. All on a Sunday is a great pop track from the Beard, trying to be a bit more accessible, but it's, classic Neil Morse and great fun. And Goodbye to Yesterday is just a fantastic ballad, beautiful, mournful, and I just think it's really fun. So there's really no weak tracks once I reevaluated it, and the strength of the opening epic and closing epics. This is just Neil Morse at his finest, and the whole band is firing on all cylinders. And when I picked up this album, I basically went through the Spock's Beard records chronologically. I picked up The Light first and was just blown away. It was really the first full modern prog album that I just completely went gaga over and just had to get everything in their catalog. And when this one popped up, it was really a revelation, no pun intended. I just really loved this, and there's just a maturity and a coolness to the sound. I like how they bring in modern influences, but still don't sacrifice their, classic prog influences. So fantastic. Love it. Classic record for me at number 37. Next on my list, I have at number 36. This is IQ and their album The Road of Bones that came out in 2014. Neo-prog from the UK. This is interesting because this is a band that I've gotten into more in their later period. I know they have a lot of classic records throughout the 80s and 90s, but to me, I really love Dark Matter, which came out in the 2000s, and then Frequency, and then this record. That's really the great trilogy of IQ records to me, and to me this is the peak of it. Dark and moody, but expressive and expansive. When I heard this record, I was blown away by it, and it has an incredible bonus CD as well that has equally great tracks on it, so it almost feels like a double disc record. But if you just focus on the first disc and the set of songs that really make up this record, they're all fantastic. Without Walls is a fantastic epic track. The Road of Bones is this really slow burn, moody track that builds and builds until the end is a great closer. So they're doing what they do best, and sometimes neo-prog can be a bit hit or miss for me, but I like when these neo-prog bands kind of brought a little bit of a darker sound, brought a little bit of almost that prog metal-ish aesthetic, and that kind of brought a new element that I really respected. And so this record has always been one of the important ones in my collection that I keep coming back to and that keeps impressing me. So I had to put Road of Bones at number 36 on the list. Number 35 is Steven Wilson's Raven That Refused to Sing. It came out in 2013. To me, this is Steven Wilson's love letter to classic prog. And of course, I am a big lover of progressive rock from the 70s, so I automatically fell for this record as well. Steven Wilson is a genius to me. I love his work with Porcupine Tree, but this is where he brought in this expert group of musicians to just play the most complicated, cool progressive rock, and every track is fun. Luminol begins with this cool bass line, and you get this almost King Crimson-y flavor to it. The Watchmaker has always been one of my favorites. I think it calls back to classic early Genesis with a great creepy kind of storytelling vibe. The Raven That Refused to Sing, the title track, is just absolutely beautiful, melancholy and dark, but just haunting and beautiful. I love Drive Home. It has this expert Guthrie Govan lead guitar solo that's legendary at this point. And you've got Theo Travis on this record, Adam Holzman, Nick Beggs, Marco Miniman. It's just an expert lineup, and every track is interesting and proggy. And it's when Steven Wilson just really embraced the prog. I feel up to this point, Steven Wilson almost treated prog as a bad word. He didn't want Porcupine Tree to be called prog music. But I feel this is where he fully embraced it and created one of the best modern prog records of all time. Post 2000s, this is probably the golden standard of modern progressive rock for a lot of people, and for good reason. It's a fantastic record that has always struck me as something special, and so it's definitely on my list here at number 35. All right, another very special record to me. And it's crazy this isn't higher, but I think, this is a good spot for it. This is Neil Morse and his album Testimony. And if you know me on the channel, I'll spoil it a little bit. I'm a huge, massive Neil Morse fan, beyond most people. I have kind of an obsession about Neil Morse and his music. He connects with me more than any other singular artist. So you're going to see a lot of Neil Morse related records. Neil Morse is probably the singular reason why I was always nervous to do a show like this, because I thought it would be too much for me to just fawn over Neil Morse for 40 records. But, I want to do it just because this is the music that means the most to me, and I want to be honest about how I feel about these records. So, Testimony, to me, what was important about this record, I listened to this so much. This is probably one of the most listened to records in my whole collection. It's a fun fact. This was the first vinyl record that I bought. I wanted to buy a vinyl record that meant a lot to me when I bought my first turntable. And so this was the one that I thought of that I wanted to start my collection with. So you can tell it's very important to me. And it's because I got into Neil Morse and Spock's Beard in the early 2000s. It was like right after Snow came out was when I got into the band. And immediately Neil Morse left the band. And I was like heartbroken and devastated and like, as my favorite artist, quit music, and now I'm never going to hear anything new from this person I just discovered and love like unconditionally. And, he came out with this record after he broke up with Spock's Beard, and it kind of removed all my fears about the future of Neil Morse and Spock's Beard with their album Feel Euphoria. And so when this record came out, I was so relieved and so impressed, and it was a concept record, and it was certainly proggy. It was very personal. It's about Neil's like conversion and how he embraced his faith and all of that kind of stuff, which is a big factor of why he left Spock's Beard in the first place. So it's very personal, and it has a lot of ballad tracks that are very emotionally driven, but there's also fun prog, and there's some quirkiness and just fun Neil Morseisms throughout the record that makes this a very captivating and fun listen. I remember getting this when I was in college for the first year and listening to it constantly when I was walking around campus and studying and all that kind of stuff. So it was a constant companion through an important period of my life. And I absolutely adore this record. The reason why it's ranked a little lower than some of the others is just maybe the consistency, like maybe certain tracks aren't as strong as others. But I wholeheartedly love it, and I just can't live without this record. So it's an important one on the list at number 34. Next at number 33, just in case you were worried I wouldn't put anything like classic on my list, anything in the older like 70s era. Here's the first from that era. This is Tales from Topographic Oceans from Yes at number 33. This is from 1973. And I've always been stunned to learn that this album isn't as beloved as I thought it was. A lot of people struggle with this record and find it to be one of the weaker moments of the 70s Yes catalog. But a lot of people champion this record too. I know Scott, the Prog Corner, is one of my friends, calls this like the best album of all time. And I absolutely love it too. I think what helped me get into it is that my dad loves this record. It's one of his all-time favorites, maybe his all-time favorite. He talks to me about how he, thinks of this album constantly. Like when he's struggling to like fall asleep, he'll like play this album in his head to kind of calm him down and get him to bed and all this kind of stuff. So it's very meaningful to my family, to my connection with my dad. And I'm a huge Yes fan. And I just feel like this is the album where they just fully embraced the prog, they fully embraced what they wanted to do, this kind of extreme vision. There's like 4 big epic tracks that are all like 20 minutes long, the side of an LP length, and they're all expansive and cool and different and exploratory. I love the adventurousness of it. This is why I loved prog. This is why I fell in love with prog in the first place, is because of this kind of music. It brought this adventurous spirit and nature, kind of brought my love of like fantasy and sci-fi literature into music by making music feel as expansive as any story, as any like novel that I loved and read. This is novel set to music, and I absolutely adored it for that. I just love all these tracks. I think it's brilliant. I don't like the revisionist history of like certain band members saying this isn't as strong as some of their other records. I just really adore it. I think it's a phenomenal achievement by the band. And I'm glad they were willing to take this risk of making this album, even though it's like not going to be commercially viable in any sense, but they followed their muse, they followed their hearts, and, created something truly artistic and brilliant. And that's what I love about music and what I'm always searching for when looking for newer artists. A brilliant record. This is like the big deluxe edition that came out this year. And I've been digging into it and loving it and rediscovering and falling in love. And that's the other thing I love about music like this, is that there's so much to discover and unpack. There's so many layers. Maybe it's not super accessible right in first listen, but if you keep giving your time to it, new things are going to unravel for you, and new things will come to light and be meaningful to you. And that's what the best music does, in my opinion. All right, at number 32, I have The Hazards of Love by the Decemberists, prog folk from the U.S. Maybe a band I don't talk enough about on the channel, but I have a deep love for the Decemberists, and I think this is the peak of their catalog, where they went full-blown prog concept record. I picked up this record once again when I was in college. I was trying to branch out a little bit from like the classic prog that I was listening to. You know, I listened to a lot of symphonic prog and retro prog, those kinds of labels. But this was a newer band that was doing proggy stuff, but didn't sound like it was just aping the sounds of the 70s. I feel like they bring a newer, like more modern aesthetic to it. And this is around the same time I was discovering the Deer Hunter, which I feel like does that as well. So I kind of tied this record in with like Act 3 of Deer Hunter, which is the album I got. I may have got them on the same day, but right around the same time I picked up this record in Act 3 and listened to them nonstop throughout whatever year it was that I picked these records up. I guess probably close to like 2009, 2010. So absolutely love this record, love everything about it, love the storyline. It's really cleverly constructed. There's a lot of fun tracks. It's accessible in a lot of ways. You know, it's not like crazy out there prog like Tales from Topographic Oceans. It's an album that I would recommend to someone just wanting to dip their toes into something that's a little bit progressive but also accessible. But I love it for that. I think it's a fantastic record. Love the aesthetic of the Decemberists, their prog folk. And sometimes they delve a little bit into prog, but sometimes they're much more, you know, traditional folk or indie rock. And those are great albums too, but to me this is where it all comes together in a fantastic way. Colin Meloy is a great frontman and singer, and there's some female vocals as well throughout the record. I absolutely adore this record and think it's special and worth seeking out if you haven't heard it before. And then finally on this list, let me pull out this giant box set that I have of this record. At number 31, it's Transatlantic's The Absolute Universe, and I have the big Ultimate Edition box set here, signed by Neil Morse, obviously, which contains all of the different versions of the album. And so this album has quite a history to it that I want to delve into. Let me pull out like the individual record though. So this is the Forevermore edition. There's, of course, also the Breath of Life version. But this is probably my preferred version of the record because it's longer and, you know, adds in a bunch of tracks that are missing from the Breath of Life version. There's also the Ultimate Edition, which comes on the Blu-ray in the box set, which is probably the definitive version that combines it all together. But I love Transatlantic's The Absolute Universe. Transatlantic might be my favorite band if you consider the consistency of their catalog. Brings together two of my favorite musicians of all time. Really they're all my favorite musicians, but, you know, I'm talking about Neil Morse and Rona Stolt as kind of the songwriting duo for this. And of course, Spock, Spirit, and Flower Kings are probably my two favorite bands. So bringing them together for this super group. And of course, I'm a massive fan of Mike Portnoy. So that just adds to the sugar on top. And then Peter Wavis playing bass is just absolutely fantastic. He's a monster on these releases in a way that he doesn't really showcase as much on the Marillion records. But for these, he just goes full prog, you know, Chris Squire style bass. And I just absolutely love it. And I was conflicted about putting this on the list because I feel like the album creation was kind of fraught with a lot of different things happening in, you know, the band, and they basically broke up after this record, and I think there might have been some bad blood a little bit because they created a record, they created all this music for the Absolute Universe, and Neil Morse kind of came and said, I feel like we could cut this down to like a single disc record, but Rona Stolt basically wanted to like keep it the big sprawling double disc record that you hear on this one. So they basically both went off in their separate corners and created different versions of the record, which are both great in their own ways. So you get the benefit of having both. So what's great about Transatlantic to me is they're always trying to top themselves and do something more extravagant and, you know, over the top. And so for this record, not only is it a double record, at least this version, but you get multiple versions of the record, you know, 3 different versions, essentially. 4 if you count like the live version that they did. So there's kind of a fun factor to that. But not only all that behind the scenes stuff and getting multiple versions of the record in this big massive box set, but the music on this is absolutely fantastic. It kind of feels like a sister album to The Whirlwind, which, spoiler alert, is one of my favorite albums ever. So I was absolutely overjoyed to hear that style from the band again. This big concept record that goes from one song into the next. It has a great epic finale. Every track has something cool and fun. They explore like some darker moments on this record as well, with like Owl Howl and those kinds of songs. But there's that light kind of power poppy side to it as well. So all in all, it's just a fantastic record by one of my favorite artists. Once again, like the Neil Morse bias is going to be strong on this countdown. And so I had to include this on the list, even though it's kind of the recency bias, and there's other Transatlantic records that maybe you'd say should go on the list above this one. Spoiler alert, there are still more Transatlantic records to come. So, but I adore this one. I just think it's really solid. It's, from 2021, it explores kind of some themes about the pandemic and things that were happening through there. So it almost feels like a catharsis from the pandemic and all of the stuff that we went through. And it's important to the channel itself. This was one of the first records that I talked about on this channel. And so it's important in that regard as well. It's one of the things that influenced me to want to start my channel. So The Absolute Universe by Transatlantic, absolutely adore it. I love their sound. If you want to know exactly what kind of music really speaks to me, just listen to this record and you'll know. This is the kind of music that speaks to me, that I love, that I talk about on the channel the most. All right, so there you have it. Numbers 40 through 31 on my list. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode and getting a peek into my tastes. So next time I'll do numbers 30 through 21. So that should be a lot of fun. There's some great records there. Of course, I think so because they're all great to me. And hopefully you have enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments some of your favorites, how you feel about my list so far. And check out these records if you haven't heard them. I strongly recommend all these records. The order of the records is, kind of arbitrary and changes from day to day. But I think this list of 40 is pretty solid. I think it fits right in line with what my top 40 favorites are. So I love it. So thank you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying this. And I'll catch you in a future episode. Bye, everybody. See you next week.